so here's one of the iconic British guitarists of the 1960s. With all due respect to players that we revere, like John McLaughlin, who we love, Jeff Beck, who we love, Jimmy Page, who at the beginning of his career was just a master, Clapton, of course, Bert Jansch. There's a number of these players that we are very appreciative of, but Davey Graham is a seminal influence on all of these people. Graham came up in the British folk scene in the late 1950s in Britain, ended up putting his traveling shoes on and just hoboed around Europe, went to Turkey, went to some of the Middle Eastern countries, and just kind of absorbed the culture on a day-to-day basis, jamming with musicians there. So his rhythm, his sense of harmony, even his melodic sensibilities change. He's going from the tradition from the time of Dowland all the way up through the skiffle movement in Britain to the Middle East, and it's changing everything. And on top of that, he's into Mingus, he's into Thelonious Monk and all the American modernists. So when you put all this together and see a record that explains itself as folk blues and beyond, what you have here is a collision of all those realities together and a very special record. Jimmy Page, all these guys will explain that Davey Graham was the person that brought the romance of the possibilities of being a musician into clear reality. This record here, we have Moaning by Bobby Timmons, we have Better Get It Hit in Your Soul by Charles Mingus. The approaches to the music here are astonishing. This is a small band with percussion, with an acoustic guitar, and there's a power and a thrust to this music that is just beyond. And whether it's just the Decca production sensibility in the studio, with their miking and their positioning and placing of the artists in the room, it's hard to believe that acoustic instruments are projecting sound sonically almost akin to a large-scale jazz band or a rock ensemble. This record has that sort of feeling to it, with the Middle Eastern scales, with his take on those things, though, not pro forma interpretations, pasted together of these different approaches. He has come together fully formed with all these influences to be Davey Graham. So here's one of the great guitar innovators in the history of jazz, although known by very few, and his name is Dell Staton. Dell came out of Cincinnati, came out of Ohio in the 1930s, early 40s. He was orphaned. His parents were killed in a car crash, and he ended up being somewhat of a rebellious child, and music actually probably saved him. He had an interest in the guitar. He had an insight into the guitar. However, there were no places that could quell his insights as to where he wanted to take this music. There were no conservatories that could train him. He ended up at Cincinnati Conservatory playing bass when he came out of the service. They gave him a full scholarship, actually. But he ended up meeting Anton Metal, a great Czechoslovakian classical guitarist, in the trenches during World War II. And they jammed together. Metal actually was a guitar maker and sent him a beautiful homemade instrument that inspired Staton to take it to the next level. Staton played a right-handed strung hollow body guitar as a left-hander. And then watch and look at his chording on this, his use of thumb. He had a very unorthodox style of playing. This is a kooky record. It's a trio with three virtuoso musicians who are informed from many different points that come together to make. I wouldn't call it avant-garde music. They just have a different point of view. The revealing thing with this, however, is that he won an Arthur Godfrey talent show and ended up being booked in about 20 clubs around the United States in 1954. And he was like a rock star for about 6 months. The TV, just, everybody loved him. The problem was, because the art was so esoteric, and he couldn't find the business people to support him to continue the flow, he ended up dropping into obscurity, ultimately moving to Miami and getting a gig in a hotel as a single guitar player with foot pedals, bass pedal, and percussion, as a self-contained musician by himself. And these recordings actually are very revealing. ABC Paramount actually put one out in 1965, and that's a beautiful record as well. He actually did make a record with Flip Phillips that was never issued, but the master was talked about for years at these jazz parties on the West Coast and in Colorado. So they actually could not find the master, finally found a rudimentary tape of it, tried to remaster it, and they issued it as a record between Flip Phillips and Dell Staton, and it's a masterpiece record. It's an impossible record to find. Fred has had it in the bins here maybe 2 or 3 times for like $8. For anybody who's into jazz, the record is called Your Place or Mine, and they're both in tuxedos on the cover. But this record here is where it starts. This is a King 12 to 500 series record. These are highly collectible records. They're very rare. This record didn't sell anything. I would say this probably would go for like $75 or $100 at max. But this is a beautiful copy. I'm going to show it to you. It's in the original rights paper. It doesn't even have probably less than even a spindle mark on this record. But with a beautiful system, putting this record on and listening to the effects that Dell Staton gets between the bridge of the guitar. I mean, he is all over the instrument, making all sorts of effects, and is really a precursor to Bill Frisell, as far as I'm concerned. They're kindred spirits. They're finding, any resource at their disposal to bring into their own inimitable vision of how to play music. And I'm not sure if Frisell actually even heard this person, but it doesn't matter, because organically these types of personalities are so resourceful in terms of wanting not only to find their own voice, but trying to factor in the love they have for different things and trying to use and honor those resources in ways that would be inimitable moving forward. So I find that a record like this and certain things that Bill has done over the years are really valuable in that respect. So I wanted to show you this record to make you realize that it is not a predictable jazz record. It is not predictable in the sense of a Jimmy Rainey or Tal Farlow or Jim Hall or any of the pre-prescribed icons of jazz guitar. This is a completely different animal. They do exist. Keep your eyes open. Always be curious about things that look different, because you just never know. If someone were to see this record in a record shop and read the liner notes of this and then look at this dude here, there's very little doubt that most people who are into jazz would buy this record. Greetings, everybody. I'm back again to speak with you about ever more jazz records. And before I start, I want to wish everybody a happy holiday. I hope you all realize that every day you wake up is a holiday. That being said, this record here, one of the greatest jazz records of the 1950s, one of the stellar records on Prestige, all-time records on Prestige. Fred Cohn, I believe, was just talking about this record, which is probably why I've brought this copy for you guys to see. Blue 7, you know, this record, there's very, very little explanation is necessary about this record. This is just a stellar quartet. Tommy Flanagan, Max Roach, Doug Watkins right in the pocket. Young Doug Watkins coming out of Detroit on bass. Sonny Rollins just nails it here. Thematic improvising at the top of the game before Coltrane takes hold maybe a year or two later on. So at this point, Sonny Rollins is the saxophone colossus. He is at the top of the game. He is taking the Charlie Parker language and subverting it into something of his own, with more space, different references, taking the implications of Charlie Parker and bringing it into a more modern, not more modern, but sense of space. The freneticism of Parker is muted by Sonny Rollins' sense of humor, sarcasm, basic personality aspects that play into rhythmically how Rollins wants to create his thematic or melodic motives. So that's what this record is about, and Blue 7 is a perfect indication of this, the masterpiece on the record.